The EP Podcast. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at theeppodcast.com.
Sitting down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar. He's been here before. We normally talk about planting trees because Evergreen plants so many of them and takes care of them in your area. But Gavin Yeaman's here to talk about pipes, which is very different. I would think the only time that trees and pipes interact, it is a bad thing. How are you?
I'm good. And it does feel different. And I think I would rather be here talking about trees, to be honest with you.
and speaking of pipes, I mean, I'll start right off with it. There was a water main break right in front of the house here on 99th over the MLK holiday weekend.
Yeah.
And I know that there's been a lot of them, and they happen all the time. They happen to the point where I knew when that break happened that even though I switched to bottled water right away because I wanted to make sure with the kids, I remembered that a break had happened right in that area in front of that neighbor's house a couple years ago. And it looked very similar, and I remember being told the water flows this way, your house isn't affected. But like, it is an issue. Like, pipes get old. And that's, I think, what we're going to talk about today. I mean, I just had this thing, Gavin, I was telling you before we sat down, where I had a plumber come in because a pipe had kind of disintegrated underneath the kitchen sink. And there was water leaking through. So he fixes that pipe, and the next one, as he's making the attachment, disintegrates. And the next one disintegrates. And then the ones that are leading up as a vent all the way to the roof kind of cave in, and a little project turned into like $1,000 project in the house. And he was explaining to me, like, look, these pipes were never meant to last forever. You know, eventually there's a shelf life, especially for these lead pipes and the ones, all the metal pipes. They only last so long, and all the houses in Evergreen are going to eventually need to be repiped because they're all about the same age.
Right.
And I would imagine it's the same for what's going on underneath the ground.
Exactly right. Like you first started talking about the water main break. When we do get those really, really cold temperatures, the frost starts pushing into the ground. You get some depth of the frost. So the ground starts to expand. The water in the main is cold, which, makes the steel a little more brittle. So you get those forces kind of acting on the mains, and that's when we typically do see those main breaks, is when you have those extended cold temperatures. But yeah, to go off of what you said about the lead pipes, this has kind of come about because of everybody remembers the, what happened in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, bad water out there.
Right, and the tragedy took place where they had elevated lead levels and all that in their water. So I think that's what spurred on legislators to kind of pass this new law at both the state and federal levels that kind of mandates the village to start replacing lead services.
Before we really get into this interview, a quick reminder, our proud sponsors, the First National Bank of Evergreen Park, love this community. That's why they're here. Investing in the Evergreen Park community. They have a total access checking account where you get free ATMs nationwide. Doesn't matter what the fee is. They put the money back in no matter where you're at. They give you a $300 bonus with qualifying activities. There's no overdraft charges. The mobile banking tools are so good, my teenagers love them. And they have award-winning customer service. They win awards each and every year for it. Switching to a true community bank has never been easier. Get in there today in that iconic building at the corner of 95th and Pulaski. The First National Bank of Evergreen Park, member FDIC. Gavin Yeaman here from the Village. We're talking pipes. I remember you were telling me about this. I would imagine a lot of people are going to react to it the same way. Wait a minute, the pipes are lead? Because you just assume, because lead is bad, that everything's been redone for a long time. But if you think about when the water system was put in, and we brought people in from the Evergreen Park Water Department before, this system has been around for a long time. The water's really coming from Chicago, like 98%, with the exception of like a couple of blocks that I want to say are over in the southeast quadrant. They run through a water facility here in Evergreen. Some of them get it directly from the city, those that 2% of homes or whatever that's over in that section. But this system has been in place for a long time. So back then, they're using materials that you wouldn't put in the ground or touch your water. But those things are still there. It's still running through those pipes.
Correct. When Evergreen was built, unfortunately, we followed the Chicago Plumbing Code, and the city of Chicago used lead water services because it was easy to work with. It was flexible, and they ran it underground into your house. And, we really haven't had too much problems over the years with them. But, yeah, as you mentioned, they're aging. We're now mandated to remove them. So that's what we're here to talk about today, is how we're going to go about this.
Okay, and what's interesting about this, before we get into how you're going to do it, but you're going to redo all the piping in Evergreen Park underground. Is that the basic gist of this?
Correct. So the water service, we'll back it up a bit. So every home has a water service that connects from the water main and comes inside your house.
So you're talking about the pipe that's going to come from the main pipe, like let's say that's running down the road. I envision everything like the video game SimCity. You ever play SimCity?
Sure.
Okay, and you got to put in water pipes and feed them to the homes. So you run a big giant thing down the street, and that's what I've always felt is going on there, because whenever there's a water main break, it seems to be along a curb area or something like that. So there's probably a pipe that runs all the way down 99th, and a pipe that turns down Homan, and a pipe that turns down Turner, and so on and so forth. And every one of these streets has a water main pipe that runs along, and then there's a connection from that takes it from there to the home. So are you just replacing from there to the home?
And yes, that's the water service, as
Okay.
we know it, from the pipe, the water main into the house. But actually on the water service, there's actually two sides. There's what we call the public side and the private side. So the public side is owned by the municipality from the water main to that shutoff that's out in most people's parkway.
Okay.
And then the other side of that, from that valve into the house, is the actual homeowner's portion.
That's the stuff that's part of my house. Like
Right.
where the plumber came over and said, your pipes probably will need to be replaced at some point. That's that portion.
Right. So that valve out in the parkway is where the ownership switches.
So you're saying you're taking everything up to that valve.
Well, we're actually going to actually offer the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
The private side and the public side.
Okay. And that would run up until where it gets in my house?
Correct.
Or you're not replacing anything in my house?
Right.
Okay.
And we would stop in the house where the water meter typically
Okay.
is.
So I know where that's like the corner of the front corner of my basement.
Right.
I see a water meter that comes in. There's a line that comes in. You would take it right up to that point.
Yeah, that's where most people's comes in, is in the basement,
Okay.
in the front of the house.
Okay. So you'd be replacing everything that's from the house out to where the main is in the street?
Right. And like I said,
Not the main. You're not replacing the main.
correct. Just from the main into the house.
Okay, this sounds huge.
It is.
I'm going to tell you something right now. Right now people are listening to this and they're going, "Uh-oh." Because I get that things need to be replaced. You're saying this is a mandated thing. So explain that a little bit to me, because right now there's somebody saying they're not digging up my lawn. So explain this to me.
Right. And it is mandated. In our project, we've been given 20 years to replace to do this project throughout town. So 20 years we have 6,500 estimated lead services. So that works out to be about 300 a year.
Okay.
So what we're planning to do is break the town down in areas and like enroll residents into the program. And that's where we'll be working for a matter of time, is in one project area.
Okay. So this will be slow.
Right.
Right now, somebody is listening to this. It could be 10 years from now when they get to your house. It could be 15 years when they get to your
Correct.
house. But eventually this is going to happen.
It is.
Okay. And what is the purpose of replacing that section when I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, the main might also need to be replaced? How old is that? Am I changing one section, but it doesn't really matter because the water's been flowing through all these other pipes before it gets to there? What's the difference in those pipes?
You're right. They're all about the same age, but the difference is most of the water mains are made of steel, whereas the services are lead. And
okay, so that's the thing. It's not running through lead all the way up to that point. It's running
Correct.
through steel. We're taking the lead out.
That's exactly right.
Okay, all right. A lot of that makes sense to me. Okay, so we're taking the lead out. Anything that's lead has to be taken out. The lead portion is from the main to your house, and so that's what you're going to change. The houses don't really have lead in them anymore, right? Or does the homeowner, after they do this, sit there and think to themselves, well, if I went through all this trouble with the one thing getting replaced, I probably should change what's in my house?
Well, they might want to start thinking about that anyway, like you mentioned, for the age factor. But most people's homes in Evergreen, when they were built, they're galvanized steel inside the house.
Okay, so really the only lead that the water's probably running through, most likely, is this section from the main to the house.
Exactly.
And it's happening in all these Evergreen Park homes. Like you said, there's about 6,500 of them that would have to be replaced over 20 years.
Yes.
And this is your thing. I feel so bad for you.
Well, yeah.
Honestly, Gavin, I feel really, really bad for you.
Yeah, this project is one that keeps you awake at night.
I mean,
for sure.
this sounds crazy to me. So, all right. So we're going to replace this. The obvious question is, when you get started, is it voluntary if somebody wants to dive right into it? Or are you just going to pick a section and just inform these people we're coming this year?
Well, a little bit of both. So we've already informed one area of town, and that would be like the western half of the northwest quadrant. So
Okay.
Millard to Harding, 91st to 95th Street. That's going to be Project Area 1. And we've sent out a lot of information to those residents. We've enrolled, I think we're approaching 300 now. And that would be like first summer's workload right there already. So, yeah, we are in communication with them. The project's going out to bid. So we should know here shortly about who the contractor.
So the village isn't going to do it. You guys are going to bid out a contractor to do it.
Yeah, to start out, we've taken out a 0-interest loan to get started.
Okay.
So we're going to start by hiring a contractor.
And it makes sense to do that because if they don't do a good job, or we could have been done by somebody better, you can switch. You're not going to be. Are you going to be linked to this contractor for 20 years, or is it something where it's?
No, we would be just in individual project
areas.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. So now, let's say I'm in that quadrant, or I'm in a future quadrant, and you tell me it's time to replace this pipe. The first thing I think of is, my lawn's going to be destroyed. There's going to be a lot of digging, and what's my house going to look like, and what am I going to have to repair? So can you take that?
Okay.
Explain that one to me. I mean, or are you just able to kind of like make a hole, rip the pipe out, run it back under the ground, and there's not a lot of damage? Like, what are we looking at?
Most of the damage will be out in the street and in the parkway.
Okay.
So on the lawns, we shouldn't experience any damage. There will be one small intrusion in the house. So like where your lead service comes up, probably out of the basement floor.
Mine's above ground, which is amazing. Like I have one, my pipe, I believe, comes in through the side, which is really weird.
Oh, through the side of the wall?
Through the wall. But I know that not everybody has that.
Right. Well,
I have that. And I remember when I bought the house, my dad was like, ooh, look at that. Because if something burst, it's easier to fix. And that was like one of the things that he pointed out.
Like my house comes up out of the floor. It comes up. So whatever your situation is, that's most likely how the new service is going to come in. So there will be a little intrusion in the house. So like at my house where it comes up out of the floor, there would have to be a small hole broken in the concrete in the basement. There will be a hole out in the street, like I mentioned, above the water main. And then there'll be a hole in the parkway where that valve is. So the contractors are not going to open trench cut this with like a machine. They're going to directional bore this underground.
Okay.
And that'll really cut back on the restoration and the damage to people's lawns because they're just going to be underground and it'll come up in the basement. So, and that's how the new service will get in.
All right. So here's the obvious question. You're going to run into somebody like me because I'm a jerk. I mean, I got to be honest. Like, I'm all for this. Like, I actually think this is a good idea, right? You take lead out of the water. That's a good thing. Things need to be replaced. I understand. I wouldn't do this. But I remember one time I had like the meters. They wanted to change my meter in the front so they could just drive by and hit it. And they kept wanting to come into my house and they wanted to put in new equipment. And I think the first time I asked a question of the company that was doing it, they just wouldn't answer my question. And I was like, well, then you're not coming to my house. So you're going to have people who are going to sit there and say, I don't want you digging a hole in my basement. You know, you're going to run into that. So how do you approach that? Because it's something that's necessary. It's something that's mandated. It's something that you have to do. So how do you approach that?
Well, our understanding is right now, if a resident does not want to participate, eventually we will just have to get a waiver from that resident saying that they refused.
Right.
And
you could wait 15 years because they might sell their house and the new person would actually do it too. I mean, like, think about that. Like, I mean, I've been in this house 19 years. I'm not going to be in this house probably 20 years from now. I mean, like, my kids are older or whatever. So I'm sure I won't be here the entire run of this thing, right? So then you would also run into the idea of, okay, this homeowner didn't want to do it. Now their house is up for sale. Before the new family moves in, we're going to do this. Like, you know.
Right. And here's what I would say to those people is eventually, and I think it sounds like it's already starting to make its way into this transaction, but if you have a lead service, that's going to have to be disclosed when you sell your house. Okay. So that, a lead service is actually going to be a negative in your sale price.
It's going to be a detriment.
Right. Whereas if you have a new copper water service, that would be, an asset to your sale price.
Does this cost me anything?
Yeah. Right now we're asking, since like I said, part of it historically or typically is the homeowner's responsibility from that valve into the house. The village is looking to add that all into one project. So right now we're thinking the village is going to be covering 80% of the cost, and we would ask the homeowner to pay 20%. Okay. Which is that's still a lot of money. Yeah. But to further reduce that burden, they can pay that percentage over a 20-year period.
Oh, So you can just make installments, any interest on that or no?
No.
Okay, so I can zero interest, slow installment, pay for this if I wanted to.
So in our first project area, our internal estimates are that this is $10,000 per house.
Wow. Okay, so what you're going to be looking for is $2,000.
Correct. And even then, we're offering an incentive if they want to pay up front. We're offering them then the total cost for them would be $1,900, or it would be $100 when it's
$100 a year for 20 years.
Correct.
I mean, if you tell me $100 a year for 20 years to have
clean
water and I can sell the house, then I think that would be something that that would probably be the option most people would end up taking.
Right, because if you choose not to, and then you have your home for sale, if they're trying to get a price on their own to replace the water service, like if a new buyer's like, I got to see how much this would cost,
they're going to say it's $10,000. They're going to want $10,000, and they're going to want $10,000 off of what the price of the house
and that's
is.
probably more, to be honest with you, because we've seen people pay up to $17,000 just for the private side.
Right.
So we'll have.
This isn't that bad. $100 a year for 20 years doesn't feel as bad when I think about the fact that I just signed up for a dating app and it cost me $50.
Right. Now we know that like costs go up too.
Right.
So we're kind of
but I'm locked in at my $100 a year, right?
Right, you are.
Okay.
So we're thinking when we move to a new project, we're going to try to stay right at that 20% of what the estimated cost is.
Okay. Now let's say I'm somebody who's like, okay, then get this done now. Like, is there a way for somebody to say, like, I don't want to wait 10 years till you get to this? Is that available or no?
The only problem with that right now is the funding. A lot of the funding sources that we're chasing to kind of keep this cost down, grants and, like I said, interest-free loans. A lot of them have stipulations about where in town they can be used.
Okay.
So that's how we have to kind of build these project areas. This first funding source, this loan, it only about half of Evergreen Park qualifies to be used in that.
Okay.
So within that project area, we kind of help break it down further by where we want to dig in the streets that are the oldest streets. We don't want to pave roads and then tear them all up again. So we want to try to focus on areas where we can.
This makes sense. You're going to cause damage to the street.
Right.
If you're going to eventually be over there fixing that street in the near future, you might as well cause the damage, fix it, not be like, oh, we just put a street in here and now we're going to damage it the next year.
Exactly right.
I get that. That makes an awful lot of sense. All right. So a lot of people listening to this may not be contacted by the village for a decade or so. That's what this sounds like. Like some people are going to deal with this now. Some people are going to deal with this way off in the future because there's only so many homes that you can do and only so many sections you can work on.
Correct. I mean, they might be getting information from us about future and how we're moving along, like when we have an update to give. But right, we'll be kind of focusing on one area where we're working, and then we'll also be reaching out to the next area to kind of be planning and doing things like that.
Kind of work ahead.
Right.
Any reaction so far? Like, I mean, I'm sure you've gotten the gamut of reactions. You've gotten people going, okay, this makes perfect sense. And you've had people go, what? Like, I mean, I need to start paying you for this pipe and I don't want it replaced. I mean, like, I'm sure you're running into all those things.
I've been pleasantly surprised though, in the first project area, we've enrolled almost 300 residents since December. I think December 1st is when we first kind of rolled out this information. So we've had a pretty good response over there.
People are understanding of what's happening.
Yeah,
I think you know what? It's normally $10,000. You're probably going to have to get this done anyway. We're going to pick up 80% of the cost, and you can pay me the other $2,000 over 20 years.
Exactly.
That really softens because trust me, when you said I had to pay $2,000, I was going to leap across this bar, you Gavin. I'm poor. I got 3 kids in school.
Right.
What the heck? I got one at Rice. I got one at the University of Illinois, and the other guy's going to Redeemer. I'm looking at you like $2,000.
Exactly right. Like
Gavin,
I said,
we're not going to eat here.
It is an expensive project.
I'm a single parent for crying out loud who's not getting any child support. Like, what the heck?
But yeah, we're leaving no stone unturned about funding sources and looking for things like that. So we're out there shaking the bushes to try to find federal, state money to keep this cost low.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, like, it's an undertaking, this project. I'm sure when it was handed to you, you were like, oh, man. like one of those, and you're going to be dealing with this thing for a while, and it's a hard thing to explain. So I think it's a good thing that you came on and kind of talked about it on the podcast, because what I'm getting is not only is it necessary for your health, but it's something that's required that has to be done. It's something that's going to devalue your home if you don't get it done in the future. And if you did this on your own, it would cost you a lot more money, and it would all be up front compared to how the village is handling it.
Right. And you mentioned the health, and I definitely don't want to cause any kind of alarm, because historically our lead testing has always been below the maximum amount.
I mean, we had the water department come in here and test the water here in this house and talk about it. So yes.
Yeah, and that's part of it too. We've had to increase our testing locations. We've had to increase our amount of times in a year we test for lead. So that all kind of goes hand in hand, but they kind of are changing the guidelines on us. You used to have like a safe level of lead in the water. Now they're changing it to say where there's no safe level of lead.
Right.
So nothing's really changed with our water source per se, but they're just changing what, their recommendations are.
I get it, Gavin. I mean, like, first they tell you there's a safe level of lead. Now you go out in the world and everybody's crazy. You're like, maybe nobody should have any lead.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the problem. There's too much damn lead. So, okay. Sounds good. Interesting stuff. Any questions? Can people reach out to you? I mean, I'm gonna give out the information. You're going to be inundated with calls from areas that you're not going to get to for 10 years. So
that's
okay. I'm worried about doing that too.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
No, we have a website they could check out at gettheleadoutil.com.
Okay.
That's our engineer that's working with us on this project. That's their site, but it has a lot of information about lead in the water. It has information actually for our first project area, which a lot of it's geared towards, but it might be beneficial for someone down the road to see how we're progressing over in that first project area. For people in our first project area, if they haven't signed up, they can sign up on that website too.
And they're basically signing up for when they want it done, or
they're signing up to say, I'm interested in it. Yeah.
Because like you said, otherwise it's going to be a waiver. Otherwise, like if they don't want to do this thing, this is a cost they'll take on eventually on their own.
Correct.
Right. Okay. That makes an awful lot of sense. Gavin Yeaman from the Village. I mean, it's a lot, but I mean, I think you explained it pretty well, and you handle all the stuff that I asked you, and you somehow convinced me that I want my pipe replaced at $100 a year. Like I'm ready, even though my quadrant, if you started over there, I'm not going to see you for a while.
But that could all change. Maybe a different funding source would be used in this area.
Here's the funny thing. As time goes on, people may forget about this. You may have to come back and explain this again.
No problem.
Thanks so much, buddy.
All right, thanks.
Building relationships, supporting the community, and service. These are the things that Country Financial stands for. They're more than just an office you may pass by as you drive through Evergreen Park. They're neighbors who lend a helping hand and support the fabric of your community, including charitable organizations, sports, financial education, and civic organizations. And since Country is already your neighbor, they want to get together and chat. Call your local Country Financial representative, Mike Thauer, today at 708-425-1559 to talk about the things that are important to you and how he can help you protect them. It's now time for your EP podcast, Word on the Street, brought to you by Spoken Vine Wine Bar and Bottle Shop, northeast corner of 95th and Kedzie, where they have amazing small plates, incredible selections of wine. And if you like the wine, you buy it in the bottle shop, you bring it home. Great prices inside of their bottle shop. You got to think, they're a wine shop. They're getting that wine in at a great price themselves. They're able to pass it along. See everything they have to offer at SpokenVineWines.com. A couple of episodes ago, myself and the mayor, Kelly Burke, sitting down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar, and she invited me to a gala at the Field Museum. That actually happened this past weekend. Our good friend Frank Murray was there, Kelly Duffy, the village clerk was there, and so many others. Kelly Duffy, excellent dancer. The only one that came out onto the dance floor with me, because I'm a dancing machine if you're giving away free booze. My thanks to the mayor, the first gentleman, and everybody else that was out there. That was a great night. The Village of Evergreen Park is actually seeking a full-time deputy clerk. This professional position assists the village clerk with administrative, financial, and record-keeping functions and assumes the duties of the village clerk in the clerk's absence. Work involves providing information and assistance to the public regarding departmental operations on the Evergreen Park Village website. You have the full description and you can apply for this job. Meanwhile, the ice rink at Yukich Field, the Dan Capuano ice rink to be exact, at 89th and Kedzie is open for the season. I think I read somewhere El Nino has happened, which means it's going to be a little bit warmer this winter than normal. So take advantage of the ice rink while it is there. Get to the village website, evergreenpark-ill.com, and get the latest in open skating hours. And the EP Rec Department Youth Soccer season begins April 19th, going through June 7th. Ages 4 to 14 or the 8th grade, that's the limit. Fee is $95 for residents, $105 for non-residents. Registration is now open through March the 14th. Call the rec department with any questions, 708-229-3373. Back half of this show is another medical segment with OSF Little Company of Mary, and I'm doing it so quickly after the last one because a good friend of mine just had a heart attack, and he's the same age as me. And so I have questions, and thus we have a cardiologist on right now on the EP podcast. I'm at OSF, Little Company of Mary, and I continue to explore this campus. I think if you watch the YouTube channel, you see that I'm in a different location every time, and I have a different physician every time, and now I have a cardiologist, Dr. Crady. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. I know they call you Dr. K around here, so if you might see me slip into that as well. So first of all, I find this to be really interesting, your field, especially because of recent events. I had a friend of mine just had a heart attack about a week ago. Oh. And I'll tell you the story because I'm curious about what your take is on it. And he's talked about it. He's on one of my other podcasts, Socks in the Basement. And he was like, I had shoulder pain, and it was driving me nuts. And it just started that morning, but I was like, I must have pulled something. So he goes to an orthopedic, and that person looks at it, and he's like, I think you need physical therapy. And like nobody thinks anything of it except that he has shoulder pain. It's bothering him all day long. He lays down and goes to bed, and it feels like somebody's standing on his chest. He's having a heart attack. Like, how often do you hear a story like that? Because to me, it was unnerving. Like, I've now been walking around for the last 2 weeks going, do I have shoulder pain? Because I didn't even know that's how it started. How common is that, and what do you think when you hear that story?
So, yeah, I mean, I can tell you, we see these kinds of patients all the time.
Yeah.
Generally, as a rule, men tend to, be sort of more typical than women when they present. So, a lot of the men, when they come in and they have their, arm on their chest clenched like this. And, immediately you see them 100 miles away and, they're having a heart attack. But sometimes people can have very atypical symptoms. And I think that's generally, more common in women, more common in people with diabetes or any sort of, similar diseases where, their body just sort of manifests things in a different way than we're used to.
Okay.
As a rule, the patients just don't read the textbook. So sometimes you just have to talk to the patient and you have to figure out, who's likely to have a heart attack. And that's where, it's important to know if you're someone who is at risk early on so that you can detect these kinds of things and you can prevent them. So, if you have diabetes and you've had it for 10 years or you're, a long-term smoker, big alcohol drinker, things like that, it should be in the back of your mind. You should be careful.
Yeah, I've told this story before on the show. A couple years ago, I was probably 30 pounds heavier, went in and saw my doctor, and he said, I want you to do one thing. I want you to go get a scan of your heart. And I went to this thing, it was like $50-$60, and went to some imaging lab, and he's like, go do this and just take a look at what it is. And I came back, and he goes, you have a very small amount of plaque in one artery. He's like, it probably is the amount of plaque that somebody who's 10, 15 years older than you would have, so you're a little bit ahead. So you got to cut out all the ultra-processed foods, and you need to lose some weight because your blood pressure is high, your cholesterol is like sitting at 200, and I want to get this down before it becomes a problem. So I lost 30 pounds, wow. And I went on the very low doses of things for cholesterol and blood pressure, and I've changed my diet, and I think it was a big switch. And I remember when I got back to him, he looked at me and he goes, nobody does this. And that was what he was laughing about. He's like, nobody does this. He's like, you know how many guys your age would have put on an extra 15 and said, I feel fine? And he's like, nobody does this. And I'm one of those people. I was just like, I'm a single dad. And I was like, I can't die. I got to be around for these kids. And so amazing. But the thing is that you probably run into that a lot. You sit there and you advise somebody like, hey, this is a problem. You got to change it. And they just kind of look at you like, yeah, I'll get to it when I do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I got to tell you look great.
Thank you.
How do you feel?
That's what I was doing. I was fishing for a compliment, Doc. Exactly. I was like, I just need somebody to tell me I look good today.
Exactly.
So, no, I mean, I feel better. Like, I've joined a gym now because I'm like, I got to start exercising more. I did a stomach surgery a few years ago.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, so, like, I lost a lot of the muscle in my stomach, so I'm trying to, like, get fit again.
Yeah.
But, you understand when you're 47, like, you have two choices. You can look like an old 55 one day, or you can look like a young 55. And this is like the moment where I'm kind of realizing that I got to eat better, I got to take better care of myself, I got to exercise. And that's probably something you're preaching to a lot of the people you're seeing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think this is, not a lot of people are in medicine, but everybody sort of has to do a little bit of investing in finance and things like that. And it's the same principle. If you start when you're 20 or 25 or 30 years old, you get a lot more bang for your buck when you're older. Then if you all of a sudden decide after having a heart attack at the age of 65 that you want to be healthy, at that point, it's very, very difficult. But I think the earlier you start, really, you have to put in much less effort to get a lot more gain when you're older. So, little changes here and there, skipping, one dessert a week, or going to the gym, 4 times a week or 3 times a week. When you're younger, even somebody like you, if you do that test and you find out, you have a little bit of plaque, sometimes the doctor will say, well, why don't you take this cholesterol medicine? And it's something that you just, take a small pill and you take it, once a day for the next 30 years, chances are that's going to prevent you from ever having a heart attack or having a big issue.
That's how he explained it to me. Like, take this pill and you'll be fine. Yeah. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I? And it was interesting to me that it sounds like a lot of people that, even in their mid to late 30s and into their 40s they have some pretty bad habits.
Yeah.
The ultra-processed food thing is kind of a big deal that people don't talk about. The food that we eat is a real problem. And that you and your fellow cardiologist are seeing that, there's a lot of people with problems out there. Like, I know he told me, he's like, don't worry about the plaque thing. There are a lot of guys that are worse than you, and they don't even realize it. And sometimes I'll see somebody who's like super ultra fit, but because of what they're eating, and because of just what they're putting inside their body, they're the ones that are having a heart attack sometimes. And that's also something that always boggles my mind. Like, here's somebody who's got muscles, they run every day, and they have their first heart attack at 45.
Yeah. And I think it's, it's not an easy thing, right? We all live within the system, and it's much easier to get these ultra-processed foods than it is to get, expensive salads and make them yourself when you're working 12-hour days and things like that. But I think, try to do it. The gains are humongous, and I think you don't have to do it on your own. So if you have difficulty losing the weight, surgeries, like you said, are helpful. There's medicines that help people lose weight. You really need to be working, with your primary care doctor, with a cardiologist. You don't have to do it alone. And I think, when you try and you feel like things are difficult, reach out, and there's a lot of opportunities. There's nutritionists, dietitians. So really, if you feel like this is something that you want to do, you need to be working with us, and we'll get you there.
Is that pretty much what you have over here at OSF Little Company of Mary? Like, you have all of that available to people? I think that people, like, we just had a essentially general practitioner that's here in the hospital on the last show, and she talked about the idea that, like, I'm here when you're in the hospital. I'm moving throughout. I'm always your doctor. So, like, if somebody's concerned about checking on their heart, better to go to their regular doctor, or are there programs here, things that they can do over here?
Yeah. So, essentially we're offering everything. We have a comprehensive heart center here, so we can, pretty much do anything that needs to be done. I think in the inpatient side of the hospital, we deal with a lot of things, not on the prevention side, but on the treatment side. So once you've had a heart attack, we treat it. If you have fast heart rhythms and things like that, we can take care of it. I think if you want to get ahead of it and you want to sort of change your lifestyle and things like that, certainly a good idea to talk to your primary about it. But also, I think it's important to have a cardiologist on board. There's no harm in seeing a cardiologist once a year, once every couple of years, and just sort of checking in, making sure that you're doing all the right things to prevent things from progressing for the future.
So I read something. You have something called an EP lab here. I'm pretty sure it's not named after Evergreen Park, and it means something else. What is that?
So it's an electrophysiology lab.
Okay, that's a different.
Very different.
Yeah.
So essentially, the heart. There's a lot of components that keep the heart going, right? So if ever you have a problem with sort of the plumbing of the heart, as in the blood vessels that supply blood to the heart. That's the kind of thing that can cause heart attacks. That's something that we deal with in the cath lab, where we put in stents and things like that. On the other hand, the heart also relies on electricity. So you have this electrical system that goes from the upper chamber of the heart to the lower chamber of the heart. And when it goes to the upper chamber, it tells it to beat, and that beats, pushes the blood forward, goes to the lower chamber of the heart. And then, the lower chamber beats and pushes the blood to the brain and the rest of the body. And, like everything else in the body, when you get older, that can sort of get older as well, and you end up with electrical issues in the heart. So sometimes, the electrical connections will die down and the heart slows down and people need a pacemaker. Sometimes what happens is you get like an electrical mass, so the electricity just spins too fast in the heart and the heart beats really, really fast. And people get palpitations, or they get, very uncomfortable with tachycardias and things like that. That can happen at any age. It can be when you're young or when you're old. A lot of these rhythms are, basically curative, and we can do that all in this electrophysiology lab. So we have a new lab that's, state of the art. We have all the best equipment, anywhere in the world. And we've been treating a lot of patients here. So we do, if you need a pacemaker because your heart's too slow, we can put that in. If your heart's too fast, then we can do these ablation.
Or if it's skipping beats. I have somebody beats. I know who that's what was happening. The pacemaker fixed that.
Yeah. So the pacemaker can fix that. Sometimes we go in through the groin and we basically just, we make an electrical map of the heart. We figure out where these skip beats are coming from, and then we just burn them, and it's basically a cure. It never comes back.
So you break all that down. It's amazing. I know somebody who's watching it or listening to it is going to sit there and say, oh, look at all they can do. And I think that's also the very interesting thing that you probably run into. I think people get kind of nonchalant about the heart now, because it isn't what it used to be like, let's say, 40, 50 years ago. Like my grandfather, God rest his soul, was one of the first quadruple bypasses ever.
Oh, wow.
He would tell the story about he was in the recovery room when it was a new procedure 50 years ago. And there were like 6 people in there, and 5 of them died in the first 3 days because they still were trying to figure out how to make it work. Yeah. Now you get a stent. You go, well, we can put a pacemaker in. We can do this. We'll get you in there. We'll fix this. We'll clean this out. We'll do whatever. It's not the same as it used to be. Is that one of the reasons why people don't take it very seriously? Because they probably should take it seriously, but they also know with all the advances in modern medicine and the things that you're talking about, they've got really good chance of survival even if they do start having a heart attack.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? So definitely, we've come a long, long way in the field of cardiology, and specifically, in electrophysiology, which is my specialty. I think, not even 50 years ago, but 20 years ago, the technology wasn't there, right? And so patients would come in and we would, put them on medicines first, and we would say, try this medicine. If it doesn't work, let's try these other 4 medicines. Tolerate the side effects, live with it, because this is the best thing for you. And then now we've come to a point where, a lot of the things that we used to try to treat with medicines that become toxic and people don't like and they have to think about every day, we can just treat with a procedure. And so, a lot of the things that people are bothered by every day, we had a patient who we just did an ablation for a couple of weeks ago, and this guy, had been having palpitations since he was 18 years old, and he went to see multiple doctors, and they put him on medicines with a lot of side effects. And you can imagine when you're 18 years old, it made him feel tired. It's really a horrible drug for someone who's 18 years old to be on. And he came to me. He was 35 now, and he had been on this medicine for a very, very long time and was feeling awful. And we set him up for this procedure, and he came in, and within 2 hours, he was cured, came off of the medicine, and he could just move on with his life and never have to think about it again.
That's amazing.
So I think, it's, if you're having symptoms that are bothering you, you should come in and you should sort of talk about it, have that conversation, and know what options are available, because today there are so many options that really help patients to get better. And I think, a big part of the reason why I chose cardiology as opposed to other fields, I think cardiology is one of the fields where we really are able to help patients. There's other fields where people come in and we say, your condition is too far gone, and there's not much that we can do. But cardiology, there's been so much research and so much advancement over the last few years. No matter what patients come in with, even if their heart, is very, very, very weak to the point that basically it doesn't function anymore, there are still advanced therapies. There's mechanical hearts, there's heart transplants. So really, to varying degrees, I think anybody with a heart condition shouldn't be afraid. And I think that's, part of the problem with people not coming in is they're afraid because they don't want to know that they have a heart problem. But you should know that if you feel like you have a heart problem because you're having symptoms, there are a lot of options. And I think the earlier you come in, the more options you have. But certainly it's one of those fields where, you can be helped, but you just need to come in and see a cardiologist.
Where do I start? Do I just call Little Company of Mary because I want to talk to you? Do I go to a doctor and say, look, I'd like to see a cardiologist. Can you refer me? Like, how does that normally happen?
Yeah, so it can happen both ways. I think it just depends on your insurance and things like that. But usually, if you have HMO, you talk to your primary, and it's very easy. They just sort of connect you to our office, and you can come in and see a cardiologist. Other sorts of insurances, sometimes you can just call the office and say, I want to come in, and we'll set you up.
All right. Dr. K is a cardiologist here at OSF Little Company of Mary. I learned a lot. Appreciate talking to you.
Of course. Thank you. I really appreciate this.
It's the EP Podcast. All things Evergreen Park. It's the EP Podcast. Evergreen Park.